There was a golden age for writers in the early 20th century where, honestly, you can make a good living writing these little stories for magazines called pulp magazines. Pulp magazines are printed on cheap paper. They were designed to be thrown away right after you read them. And the only rule was, don't be boring. Pulp authors didn't care about critics, they only cared about readers, and they just wanted to provide an escape. What did they know that modern storytellers have forgotten? What can we learn from them? So we're going to look at these 8 pulp storytelling secrets that you can use to improve your fiction. And the very first one is writing the riposte. And this comes from Dashiell Hammett, who's best known for The Maltese Falcon, but also wrote things like The Thin Man and several other novels. And he used to always publish in a pulp magazine called Black Mask. Now, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is a riposte? And that's a good question. It's basically a quick-witted reply, and it happens in dialogue. So here's an example from The Thin Man. Nora asks, "How do you feel?" And Nick replies, "Terrible. I must have gone to bed sober." Or in The Maltese Falcon, someone says, "I could have shot you, Mr. Spade." And Spade replies, "You could have tried." So in your dialogue, look for comebacks that sort of flip the previous line of dialogue on their head. Maybe they contradict it, maybe they undermine it, maybe they reverse it. But the general principle is shorter is almost always better. Sometimes 3 words can be way more powerful than 3 lines of dialogue. And the third thing that Dashiell Hammett teaches us is that these are good ways to build up your character. When Spade says, like, "Yeah, you could have tried to shoot me," it just comes across as being so full of confidence and bravura. And by the way, I have 2 ways to help you write your book. Bookfox Academy, my collection of 10 courses that will guide you through the process of writing your novel. It's on demand, so you can watch the videos whenever you want. And then also BOOKFOX LAB, which is my mentorship and coaching program. You will get feedback on your book, you meet with mentors, you get lots of craft instruction. It's incredible. The link is in the description. Go ahead and check those out. The next storytelling secrets we can learn from pulp fiction writers is number 2, atmosphere over plot. And we're taking this one from H.P. Lovecraft, who is a master of the horror genre and probably best known for The Call of Cthulhu. And he published a lot of his stories in one of the most famous pulp magazines, Weird Tales. Now listen, I know that H.P. Lovecraft was not a good human being, and feel free to argue whatever you want to in the comments about that, but we're only looking at his fiction, not condoning anything he believed. Now, as far as atmosphere over plot, I do find this quote from Lovecraft to be really interesting. "Atmosphere is the all-important thing. For the final criterion of authenticity is not the dovetailing of a plot, but the creation of a given sensation." Now, that sounds like a very high-minded ideal, okay? Like, atmosphere is a lot more important than we give it credit for, sometimes more important than the plotting itself. But then, I think back to The Call of Cthulhu, and there's a lot of plot in those first pages. He tantalizes you with a mystery, there's this mysterious murder of a professor, and he finds a locked box inside a locked box with this evil statue inside. But if you keep reading on, there are a lot of places in this book where there's a lot of time spent on just creating this atmosphere. There's a moment when police are coming to a New Orleans voodoo orgy, and here's that passage. He really describes these ugly roots and Spanish moss. He describes malformed trees and bobbing lanterns. He describes the muffled beat of tom-toms and faraway shrieks and reddish glare. I mean, yeah, he's doing a good job using description to make you feel like this is a creepy place. And it's true that in his genre of horror, having that sort of creepy atmospheric dread does a lot to set the reader on edge. So in general, I would agree with him that mood is just as important to the reader as the actual escalation of the plot. All right, I love this next point about pulp magazines. It is number 3. Epic opening hooks. A writer named Max Brand, much better than his birth name of Frederick Faust, and he wrote westerns. In fact, this guy was known as the king of the pulps. He wrote books like The Unnamed and Range Jester, and most of the time he published a lot of his stories in Western Story magazine. I feel like Brand's stories do a great job of starting the story really quickly in a way that will not let you stop reading. So check out this opening of Range Jester. 3 men came over the horizon. All 3 were headed for Loomis, and one of them was to die before morning. So a little bit of writerly quiz time here. Is this foreshadowing or foreboding? Foreshadowing is specific information about the future that leaves something out. For instance, we know one of them is going to die, but we don't know who and we don't know how. While foreboding, on the other hand, is sort of like this general sense of uneasiness. We don't know any specifics, but we're a little worried. So I would say overall that this is foreshadowing, but do we get a little bit of foreboding because of this foreshadowing? foreshadowing? Yeah, because, a death is on the horizon, so that makes us a little uneasy. Now, can you have foreboding without foreshadowing? And I would say yes, absolutely, right? Somebody entering a really creepy house, we might not know any information about what's going to happen in the future, but we're uneasy because, like, that house itself is anxiety inducing. Anyway, I think one thing the pulp magazines definitely teach us is to start quickly, to start with a strong hook, and maybe to start with some foreshadowing. This fourth point is absolutely a lot of fun. It is Escalating Energy. Let's look at an author called E. Doc Smith. He's best known for his sci-fi and space opera. Probably his most famous work is Galactic Patrol, and he often published his Lensman stories in Astounding Stories. So the writing principle we get to him is that don't be afraid of putting your writing energy on the page. He constantly was escalating everything in a story, an escalation of scale, an escalation of stakes. Everything's always dialed up to 11, with the weapons and the rockets having this indescribable power. And right when you think like, oh, the stakes couldn't possibly be higher, oh, he goes and makes them even higher. And I also have to point out his wild use of exclamation points. This is a guy who writes as if his hair is on fire. And in Galactic Patrol, he actually has 529 exclamation points. I mean, okay, that's a bit much there. I mean, and you might say like, oh, this is the type of writing that's best for junior high boys, but I do think there is something important about trying to imbue your writing with a sense of energy, even if you use slightly fewer than 529 exclamation marks. Yes, it can be dangerous to have over-the-top writing because people will like roll their eyes and think your writing is cheesy or something like that, but there's also a very strong value of constantly raising stakes and constantly having a lot of energy. When Jonathan Safran Foer was studying with Joyce Carol Oates at Princeton, the very first time that she read his work, she gave him one of the best compliments. She said that he had that most important of writerly qualities, energy. And if you've ever read Jonathan Safran Foer, you know this is a man with energy. Another example of a super energetic writer would be Tom Wolfe. Look at the electric Kool-Aid acid test or the candy-colored tangerine flake streamlined baby. I mean, if you can't tell from those titles alone, these are very energetic books. Look, I think the ultimate takeaway for writers is you want to have sentences that crack and contain a lot of the energy of life in them. Also, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet, and hit the like button, because it gives me a little bit of encouragement to keep making these videos. And now for the next storytelling secret we can learn from pulp magazines. It is number 5, use more flyting. For this principle, we're going to look at Robert E. Howard, who is best known for his Conan the Barbarian stories. And he's best known for The Phoenix on the Sword and Red Nails, among many others. And he's another author who often published in Weird Tales. Now, one thing Howard was known for was using this technique of flyting. Now, flyting is basically a precursor to modern rap battles. You basically have two characters exchanging insults with one another. And the insults are witty and they're poetic and they're really trying to outdo each other. It's a competition. So in The Frost Giant's Daughter and other stories like it, you will see him shouting insults at his opponents like these ones. So any chance you get to have your characters call each other names or trash talk one another or have some verbal one-upsmanship, you should take it. Sometimes it's a good thing to not have your characters say the thing that they're thinking, but in genres like these, just let them fly. Let them go and say exactly what they're thinking in the most boldest, brashest terms possible. It basically makes all the conflict external so the reader can enjoy it. Let's continue these storytelling secrets with number 6. Practice genre blending. So if you've noticed, a lot of these pulp magazine writers have been male, but this was one of the leading women writing for pulp magazines. C.L. Moore, and she was best known for Northwest Smith and Jirel of Joyerie. She might be best known for her short story Chamblot, and she also often published in Weird Tales. One writing principle that I think we can really learn from her is that she did an amazing job blending multiple genres together. I think that she was one of the very earliest writers to seamlessly fuse together science fiction with fantasy, with horror, and with romance. She didn't treat different genres as different boxes that had to keep separate from one another. She treated them all as colors, and she would just use all those colors simultaneously inside of a story. So Chamblot, yeah, ostensibly it's sci-fi because it deals with this space traveler on Mars, but then there's a lot of eroticism inside of it, there's a lot of horror inside of it, and there's also this sort of mythic quality with this Medusa type creature. Another example would be her Black God's Kiss, which did an amazing job mixing her sword and sorcery fantasy with horror. So what's your takeaway from this? Listen, if a scene wants to be eerie, let a sense of horror bleed into your sci-fi. And if your world needs a mythic scale, then let some fantasy bleed into your noir. Essentially, you want to trust the emotional logic of your story more than you want to trust like, oh, here are the genre rules. All right, we have 2 more lessons to learn from these pulp writers. Let's start with number 7, which is Primo-Level Description. You probably knew at some point I was going to get to good old Raymond Chandler, best known for his Philip Marlowe series and The Big Sleep, Farewell My Lovely, and The Long Goodbye. And he published a lot in a pulp magazine called Black Mask. Now, there is a lot to admire about Raymond Chandler. Honestly, it was tough picking only one thing. You know, he's the founder of this entire genre of this hard-boiled detective. You have all of his clipped phrasing, which is absolutely wonderful. You have his tight plotting. I mean, he's just a really talented author. But no matter what genre you write, I think you can learn a lot from an often overlooked aspect of his writing arsenal, and that would be his talent at writing description. We're going to look at one specific category of that, simply how he describes smiles in Farewell My Lovely. Check out this woman who smiles at him, and it was a dry, tight, withered smile. A smile that would turn to dust if you touched it. Ooh. Chandler, you're so good. Or check out this very threatening smile. It was like the executioner smile when he came to your cell to measure you for the drop. I just love the threat in that smile. It reminds me of Shakespeare's most famous line about a smile. There's daggers in men's smiles. Or here's another one. Then he smiled. He was doing an awful lot of smiling that day, using up a whole week's supply. I love this guy who has a certain allotment of smiles per week and he doles them out very sparingly. Or apparently at that moment he wasn't saving enough of them. So look, you can copy all the most stereotypical examples of Chandler's writing, but then you miss the stuff that really makes his prose come alive, stuff like these little descriptions. And if you miss those little descriptive elements, your story isn't gonna pop the way it needs to. All right, now we're to our final point from these pulp magazine writers. Let's look at number 8. Surprise the reader at chapter's end. So you might have heard of Edgar Rice Burroughs from his work in writing Tarzan and also John Carter. And he published a lot in a magazine called All Story. Now the original Tarzan stories are great, they're wonderful, but we're not going to deal with those today. We're going to look at John Carter, specifically his novel A Princess of Mars, which was the story that the John Carter movie was made on, by the way. So if you look at the last paragraph of the chapters in this book, a lot of them are ending with a surprise. End of chapter 4, a monster arrives. He's terrified. End of chapter 5, an ape-like creature grabs John Carter by the neck. End of chapter 8, he sees a beautiful female prisoner for the first time and she signals him. End of chapter 13, he starts a romantic relationship with a female prisoner. You saw that one coming, didn't you? End of chapter 14, oh, he gets stabbed in the chest during a battle. We don't know whether he survives. I feel like ending your chapter with a surprise is the very essence of pulp magazine writing, where the entire goal is to make sure the reader keeps reading. They are fighting tooth and nail to keep the reader's attention page by page by page. Now, I do have to add a caveat that not every chapter is using this technique, and it's a good idea for you not to use this chapter for every single technique because it can get a little old and a little hackney and a little bit of one note or repetitive. Look, the pulp era was a glorious heyday of storytelling, and I hope you've been able to glean a couple of tricks and techniques from them. Don't forget to check out the links below for Bookfox Academy and for Bookfox Lab to make sure you get the help you need to finish your book, and I hope you all have a wonderful writing day.